Thank you so much. I appreciate that. So, I want to go over the mechanics, how it works in terms of process of being interviewed. And I'm taking the time to do that for the afternoon session because I am concerned about how many GLD did not turn up for the morning mandatory session and never turned in their practices for describing types of volunteers. And I want to be sure that they do that and don't use any excuse of no time to not do that. I also have, goodness, quite a few, over half of our volunteers where I've asked them, yes, you're approved now, but I need you to still send me another redo just so you've done much improvement, but it's still not really quite there. And they kind of, at the answer of being approved, have kind of dropped that request that they send me another. Yeah, I didn't want to not approve them because they were so much improved and yet not really quite ready. So I am hoping I get the redos from those who have not been approved and the redos from those that have been approved for their starts and endings this week. And I'm hoping that I get the description after they've listened to the audio only, after they've carefully listened to the instructions. So I don't listen for nothing, wasting my time, wasting their time, and then having to repeat, all because they haven't bothered carefully listening. I hope they listen to the part A for today and then do their description of the types of volunteers, knowing they never, never, never describe all those types to someone because that will bore them. And what else will it do that we learned this morning? It will be you doing too much talking before you have them talking, which means their brains will go dull gray and you'll no longer have those wonderful pink synapses sitting up. All right. So from this morning's lesson, we have that. And this afternoon, we get a shortcut. Thank God. Thank you, Lord. This morning, we get to look at the process. Every person who is a GLD must listen to the interview week by week, part A and B tapes. They must. They have no option, or they shouldn't be a GLD. Every timetable for any GLD needs to have the miscellaneous time that is for interviewing. Their interviewing time is not spent interviewing, it is spent learning the audio lessons and practicing until the point that they are approved. Once they're approved, then all they need to do is to account for in their timetable the time that they're spending with their 2 half-hour sessions on Wednesday, and then their probably half-hour to hour of practicing afterwards. Very important. And you want to have that in your timetable so you don't end up stressed and wondering why. You cannot interview if you're not improved, but if you're approved, it means you're doing both interviews and continued training that goes on for 16 weeks. And there were 2 weeks that were missed. So that 16 weeks is 18 weeks actually from our starting date, but 16 lessons, A and B. That means you have to account for that much time in your interviewing. If you are a GLD who has been approved and is doing interviews, please make sure the GLD management team is spreading who they're doing interviews amongst. They can be lazy just like I am, just like you are, just like we all are. Why? Because we're tired. We have too many demands. So they will, of course, they will just keep assigning the same people, just like I would, because those are the people you're used to. And so you assign. I do no different. The problem is I want each of my GLD to get really, really good and practicing and more comfortable. But I don't want them doing any interviewing if they're not improving as they're practicing. That's not fair to the applicants. It's not fair to IHF, but most of all, it's not fair to them. All they'll be doing is doing the same thing. What are they learning from that, really? You need to really be understanding it at deeper and deeper levels. So what that means in short is if you're not approved, send in your practices and you need to get approved in order to remain a GLD. If you are approved, look at how many interviews you're doing, track those hours so you're credited for those time, and take in account the mandatory Wednesday A and B meetings and often practice that's due after that when you're looking at your timetable and sending your timetable back in for the CEO's approval. If you find yourself too stressed because these miscellaneous times are not being counted. When a new GLD comes into IHF, they cannot be overwhelmed with information and training and packets they're not allowed to do. They can't do that if they're not learning the interviews first. I don't want them doing it. I saw Florence was assigned, and I'm like, why was Florence assigned? I've never heard her practice sessions. That's against all our rules. You cannot assign her. Now, these are only new rules since September 1st, but I can't get them followed. And we're now getting towards the end of October. So this session is to make sure our wonderful, wonderful Florence may not have ever been sent any interviews, audios, training to be trained, because I haven't gotten any practices from her. You cannot interview if you have not done your practices with me and been approved. It's just that simple. If they're brand new, what do they get then? What do they get since we have this new system, since we found out the quality of training needed to be greatly helped? What do we do? We're going to have that template letter that I still have not received, the template letter that says that we need you to listen to at least 1 week's training a week. We're hoping that as you begin, you can start with the first 3 to 6 trainings as it's possible for you to do so. And after your practice sessions for your starting an interview and ending an interview, we can take you into the interview packet and go further with you so you can begin your interviews. That introduction, letting them know their interview time that was allotted to them as miscellaneous time, and it applies to each of you, is including this interview training. Why? Because I want you to be so dang good at it. That's why. So please give yourself time and track your time, and interview management and every GLD. Please let me know if you find that we have new people coming in who are being sent a lot of information they can't possibly understand. If things are not kept simple when they first come in, they will not remember the basics. It's why, for those of you that have been GLDs for a long time, it's why I have let certain teams like data, etc., not be open, donated hours not be opened, even though we've always had them, because I didn't want you overwhelmed with too many teams at once. It's why I wanted you to just learn the basics of leadership on your teams and the tasks on your teams first, because you'll be overwhelmed. Well, the same thing is true for newcomers. If you send them a huge packet for interviewing, they have no practices, they're then sent a practice session and sent all this information and rules, they will be swimming without a lifeboat. Please don't do that. Just let them know in a wonderful, simple template that this is the beginning of their journey with improving their skills in being interviewed and interviewing and in international communication norms that they will find helpful to their professional and personal life both. Start your journey with us by starting on the first week, A and B, and moving forward as you can without stress. The sooner you can do your first 3 to 6 interviews, the better it will be for IHF and for you. But we do understand that it takes careful listening and practicing in order to incorporate those skills. That is enough. They just need that and the audios. Do let them know a date that they are required to send their practice in. So that doing the dates according to the audios, I've been very careful about spreading the practices out. And right now, what practices do we have in IHF with all the videos, audios? I've given lots of information, but I've only required 3 practices. Why? Because they're going to have to be redone and redone until there's a lot of improvement. And because I don't want people to get overwhelmed. So they have the start practice, the end practice, and types of volunteer practices. And they can't, those are 3 practices. They'll just be redoing them until they improve a lot and before we go forward. If you are new and you have been sent an interview packet and all kinds of material, don't worry about it. The only thing you need is the interview notes sample of what the questions are that are asked, the day after sample so you know what they get the next day, and the audios that you have to listen to and practice. You don't need anything but that when you're new. If you have been with us for a while and you have not been approved for those 3 practices, make sure you get those 3 practices approved. At each level, I can't approve you again until you've completed that level. In other words, if you've done your start and end and you've been approved by those, so you're doing interviews, you must get in your description of different types of volunteers before I can approve your description of different types of volunteers. I'm not as worried about your description being accurate as I am about your tonal variety and your ambiance when you give us that information. Next week, I am going to go into, and this is a really important part because we touched on it already, into the description of our different teams and divisions. I do not want to do that yet because I'm worried that you'll be overwhelmed and waylaid from giving me what you didn't give me last week and you were supposed to, the description of the different types of volunteers. Okay, but we do need to cover, and I can't get to general international communication. That is just my favorite subject in the world. I cannot get to that until we cover the teams, how you describe the teams and their divisions, and how you assign those teams to people in the easiest, smoothest, most efficient manner. And that then brings you to the end. And you already made the end. So you already did your 3 T's and pointed out your 3 T's. And at the end, you did your 3 T's. And so once we get that down, you've done it. We've gone through, they're discussing themselves and assigning them the teams. Now, when we get that done, I hope it's next week. I hope you guys follow through. When we get that done, then we'll get into communication norms and the really fun stuff that I love. And that's when you're going to use those norms for when they're talking about themselves. You're going to use those. It will integrate into that middle part, but we cannot get there until we do the basics. That communication is what you're going to use anywhere you work or live with human beings, but we cannot get there until you do these practices. So please be cognizant that anyone new is only sent, they're not sent the interview packet until they've been approved. And who approves them? At this point, unfortunately, it's the CEO. I'm hoping that pretty soon it will be our practice interview team. And if anyone wants to join that, wonderful. But right now, unfortunately, it has to be me. I hope that ends soon. When it comes to the new person, you have the template for them, the interview notes form, and the day after form, and most important, the list, the podcasts of the interview lessons. And your template explains to them that they must turn in a practice session for the interview start and then a practice session for the interview end before they can get approved. For your people who have been with us for some time and are not brand new, you must send in your description, please, of the different types of volunteers and be prepared. Listen carefully to that audio that's about our different teams and how you decide upon the team you want. Be prepared to concentrate next week on being able to assign teams and able to answer me about any team and what that team's motivation is when we focus on that next week. Okay, that's all. I'm keeping it very short today and hoping that the time is used instead so that this week, unlike last week, you actually listen to part A of this week and you actually do the homework from last week that you folks didn't do. All right. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you everyone for joining.